Good morning, everyone. This is Stephanie Loop and Shanna Leger from the Louisiana Department of Education Division of Nutrition Support. We're excited that you're joining us today for our Summer Food Service Program 2022 program. Thank you for being with us here today. To get us started, we're going to start with the Department of Health. Alina Carlin is going to do a presentation on LDH standards and requirements for summer feeding. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Good morning, everyone. This is Alina Carlin. I'm with the Retail Food Program for Louisiana Department of Health, and we'll be talking about the summer feeding program for 2022 for new sponsors. Next slide. So sponsors must apply for permits for each feeding and or cooking site through the local LDH office. Inform the parish sanitarian's office of the operations that will take place. These include the cooking and feeding site locations and delivery routes, the type of site you'll be providing, types of meals, who will be providing the meals, and plan for how food will be delivered safely. Next slide. Only schools that are part of the USDA National School Breakfast and School Lunch Program do not require an additional permit to operate. The summer feeding site and our cooking site must have an LDH permit to operate. If the sponsor site serves food at a different location, then they will need a permit at the other feeding site location. Sites must have a Louisiana Department of Fire. Next slide. The summer feeding sponsor kitchen and site must meet the sanitary code requirements. That's the Louisiana Administrative Code, Title 51, Part 23, Retail Food Establishments. It can be found on our website, www.eatsafe.la.gov. So the retail food portion of the code requires that anyone who sells or distributes food have an LDH permit to operate. The sponsor feeding site needs an LDH permit to distribute or serve food. There are different types of sites that can be provided. We're going to go through those over the next few slides. Next slide. The full service kitchen is a kitchen that prepares, cooks, and or heats food to serve. These sites will be required to have a hand sink with hot and cold running water in all food prep and dishwashing areas, including soap and paper towels, a hand sink with soap and paper towels accessible for the children in the congregate settings. This hand sink should be away from food prep areas, a 3-compartment sink for washing, rinsing, and sanitizing, a grease trap. You would have to contact the chief building official in your parish for the grease trap sizing, cold holding equipment and possibly hot holding equipment, depending on the menu, soap, sanitizer, and sanitizer test strips for washing, rinsing, and sanitizing, a mop sink and a dumpster pad, restrooms for staff and children dining at the site. Next slide. The satellite kitchen is a kitchen where no food preparation or cooking takes place. Food is provided from a sponsor-run full-service summer feeding site or from a commercial kitchen with an LDH Food and Drug Manufacturing permit. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. All food items must arrive on temperature, and a log must be used to record the dates, times, and temperatures of the food. You must retain logs for 3 years plus the current year as required by the USDA and LDOE. Minimal food assembly is allowed. With congregate dining, a hand sink must be available with hot water and soap and paper towels for children in service to wash their hands. Restrooms for staff and children at the dining site must be available also. Next slide. For congregate feeding sites only, there are minimum requirements for feeding sites that must be met for a permit to be issued. The feeding site must have access to equipment and plumbing as noted as available at the site. Children dining at the site must have hand washing facilities and supplies. The permit must be posted at the feeding site for all days of service. A temporary permit will be issued for dates provided by your sponsor. Next slide. For congregate dining outdoor sites, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly is allowed here. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing, and containers must be maintained clean. Containers such as ice chests and Cambros. A hand sink with hot water, soap and paper towels must be available for children and servers, and also restrooms should be available for children and servers. Next slide. For congregate dining mobile units or traveling food establishments, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly on a mobile unit is allowed. All food must be prepared and assembled at the commissary. The safest meals for mobile food establishments are shelf stable. However, if food is transported to sites that is potentially hazardous, the mobile unit must use the time as public health control. You would have to submit a plan to the parish sanitarian's office with your application, and the operator is required to have a written plan. You have to keep logs of the food, discard all potentially hazardous food at the end of a 4-hour time period. Logs must be recorded, and the food must be recorded. They must be removed from temperature. Sorry, I'm messing this up. Logs must indicate the time was removed from temperature control and time for discard. You also must maintain logs for 3 years plus the current year. The food should be labeled with the discard time. Sorry about that. So single service utensils and plates only are allowed in this situation. And I'm going to go over this again really quick. So for time as public health control, you're only allowed to have the food out of temperature for up to 4 hours. The time that you remove it from the temperature control is when the time starts. After you have up to 4 hours. If you decide to only do 2 hours, that's fine, but it has to be discarded up to 4 hours later. You can't have leftovers in this case. Okay, next slide. For the congregate mobile feeding units, they must have a commissary. A commissary is a permitted base of operations. It's an LDH permitted brick and mortar building where food is stored, prepared, and held at the appropriate temperature before being delivered to the sites. A letter from the commissary is required. You must report to the commissary daily for supplies and cleaning services. The commissary is provided for dumping and flushing liquid waste from the wastewater tank. The liquid waste shall be discarded to a permitted sanitary sewage system. The servicing area must be kept clean and in good repair. Potable water servicing equipment must be installed to prevent cross-contamination, and potable water must be obtained from the commissary for hand sinks if needed. Next slide. For the congregate mobile feeding unit, restrooms must be provided by the stop site. A hand sink with hot water, soap and paper towels must be available for children and servers. The site may add additional hand sinks with portable sinks for use by the diners of the congregate mobile unit. If portable hand sinks are used, they must be filled with potable water, and wastewater must be discarded. The operator must include a schedule of proposed times and addresses on the stops on the route. Next slide. So the summer feeding site application for permit can be found at our website, www.eatsafe.la.gov. And this is just a list of the different types of sponsors that may be providing summer meals. Specifically for the new sponsors, you're going to be the second bullet. Any first-time use site that has never been used as a summer feeding site must submit a retail food plans review packet questionnaire. Please include a floor plan and menu, and also submit a summer feeding site questionnaire. If you're a congregate mobile food unit, then you're going to submit the mobile food establishment plans review questionnaire. You'll also have to include a floor plan, a menu, a commissary letter, and time as public health control plan for the potentially hazardous foods if you're providing those. Also, you'll have to provide a summer feeding site questionnaire and also provide a list of site locations where children will eat the food. Next slide. The summer feeding site questionnaire and the retail food plans review packet questionnaire should be submitted to the local LDH office a minimum of 2 weeks before the summer feeding service begins. Plans can typically take 7 to 10 business days for review and approval, and they sometimes can take longer if you don't provide all of the information necessary. They're not always approved either, so please don't wait until the last minute to submit your plans. Also remember to include a floor plan of the space and a sample menu. And also remember that April 15th is the deadline to apply for the LDOE with LDOE as a sponsor. Next slide. Plumbing requirements are the department who handles the plumbing requirements is the chief building official in the city or parish office. They regulate the plumbing, the restroom fixture counts, and the grease trap sizing. Again, just make sure that you contact them early so there's no delay in approving the site. If the site manager does not own the site location, the sponsor must submit a site agreement made with the owner of the site. Please include information regarding the equipment that the summer feeding site will have access to in the facility and provide the times that summer feeding meals will be served. Example I give is that if you are using a church as your site and the summer feeding sponsor is not the owner of the church, then you'll have to submit a site agreement that's made with the church owner, basically stating the times that you'll be providing the meals and what equipment you will have access to. Next slide. So for the summer feeding site questionnaire, you'll also want to provide sponsors who plan to deliver food to multiple feeding sites must submit the locations and routes of all feeding sites, the proposed delivery times, a written plan for explaining the delivery plan for holding food at safe temperatures, and you'll also have to train staff on how to monitor and record those temperatures. Next slide. Each mobile unit must submit an application packet. The operator must include a schedule of proposed feeding times and addresses on the stops of the route. Also, if potentially hazardous food is served, make sure that you provide a Thames Public Health Control plan. Again, it's a responsibility of the cooking site to mark when food was taken out of temperature control, and it's the responsibility of the feeding site when the food is used or discarded. Again, you'll have to submit a commissary letter if you're a mobile feeding unit as well. Next slide. So once plans have been approved, the parish sanitarian's office will submit an approval letter or send you an approval letter to the applicant. Once you receive the approval letter, it will be up to you to contact the LDH sanitarian's office to schedule a pre-opening inspection whenever the establishment is ready. The inspector will schedule your inspection, but again, you must be the one to call in advance to let them know when you're ready for inspection. A person with the legal authority to sign for the sponsor must sign the temporary permit to operate before or at the time of inspection. And a person in charge of the summer feeding site must be on site at the time of inspection. Those may be two different people, by the way. When you're at the opening inspection, the site should be ready for service. The refrigeration should be 41 degrees or lower. You also must have hot water, sanitizer, and sanitizer test strips for washing, rinsing, and sanitizing, and soap and paper towels must be provided. The permits will not be backdated to include dates of service previous to the issuance of the permit. In some cases, based on the length of service, a second routine inspection is required if longer than 31 days of operation. Next slide. The issuing of a temporary permit occurs when all requirements are satisfied and the site passes inspection. The site must not operate until a temporary permit has been issued. Permits are not transferable to other owners or locations. The end date on the permit indicates the end of food service. If extensions are needed, the sponsor should contact the local LDH office to request an extension. This is important because if it's outside of those permit dates, then you will not be reimbursed for the food that is served outside of those dates. You want to make sure that you post the permit at the site as well as your inspections. You can go to the next slide. Also, remember that the feeding site must have a temporary permit to operate. Please make sure to submit the summer feeding application and retail food plan review packet questionnaire at least 2 weeks before you plan to operate. Please, again, don't wait until the last minute. The deadline for sponsors to submit applications is April 15 to LDOE. Other helpful information can be found at our website, www.eatsafe.la.gov. On the homepage, you can find the summer feeding information link, and it'll lead you to the summer feeding site questionnaire. And then also the plans review packet questionnaire for retail food establishments and the plans review packet questionnaire for mobile food establishments can both be found at the new businesses tab on the homepage. You also may contact the local LDH office for the summer feeding site questionnaire. Not every LDH office has clerical staff. Remember to contact the office before stopping by to ensure someone will be there to help you. Next slide. My name is Alina Carlin. Carol Newsetzer is my supervisor. Our emails and phone numbers are provided if you have any questions. It looks like, if you wouldn't mind, if I can just touch on a couple of things, it's just food safety issues. We also have a little bit of food safety training or slides that is on our website as well. Just want to encourage and remind that food safety is very important. Make sure that you're keeping your food cold, 41 or below. If you're serving hot food, it needs to maintain 135 or above. Kind of again, reiterating about the term as public health control. If you're going to use it, you have to submit a plan to the parish sanitarian's office. Make sure that you're keeping your logs, make sure that your food is marked for the discard time, and then it's actually being discarded after that 4-hour period. Again, make sure you're maintaining your logs, and washing hands is very important. Hand washing for a minimum of 20 seconds, hot water and with soap, and of course drying with paper towels. Wash your hands often. If you're coughing or sneezing, do your best to try not, if you're sick, definitely don't be working with the food. And also if you're eating and drinking, smoking, you want to make sure you wash hands immediately after that, after using the restroom, changing tasks. Also want to make sure that you're washing hands between handling raw and ready to eat foods. Please keep your raw and ready to eat foods separated as well. I just wanted to make those quick notes as a reminder for you guys. But again, we encourage you guys to take food safety training. And we do have those slides on our website again. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Alina, thank you. We will open it up now for questions. If you have a question, you can go ahead and put it into the chat box, and we will share that with Alina and see if we can get you an answer. So we'll just we'll wait a minute for that. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So Alina, thank you so much for that training. And I think everybody has your contact information if they come up with a question later. Of course, you can ask us at LDOE, and we can also pass that question on to LDH if you have a question coming up in the future. So we're going to go ahead and transition into the SFSP portion. What we need to share with prospective new sponsors. So this training is specifically for prospective new sponsors. So maybe this is the first time that you've sponsored, or it's been several years since you've sponsored. Then you're in the right place. This training is for you. Again, my name is Stephanie Loop, and I'm here with Shanna Leger, who is the program coordinator for SFSP, the Summer Food Service Program. And so we're going to be giving program year 2022 updates. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shanna.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is Shanna Leger with Department of Education. And as Stephanie said, I'm the Summer Food Service Program coordinator. So in today's training, some of this may be all new to those that are in participation. Some of you may know some of these terms and some of these things, and it's kind of just a refresher. But we want to just go ahead and acknowledge that we understand we have jam-packed a ton of information in this 2-hour slot. We're trying to touch on all of the really pertinent things that deal with summer food service program, but fear not. Towards the end of the presentation, we are going to talk about some additional training opportunities that we are making available this month and next month. There's going to be 6 additional trainings, and they're all going to be focused on one specific topic or training area. So like meal pattern will be one, procurement procedures will be 2 of them. And then we'll talk on like record keeping requirements, specifically revising the online application, things along those lines. So you'll get a tidbit or a high level, overview of those things today, but because of the time that we're allotted, obviously we can't go into a lot of depth on everything today. As we begin the presentation, we did want to give y'all a couple of slides of some acronyms that you're probably already starting to see that we at the Louisiana Department of Education, Division of Nutrition Support, we throw these acronyms out quite a bit. We don't even realize we're doing it oftentimes, but we're just so accustomed to them that we do use them a lot in conversation. So we wanted to have these slides for you guys to flip back to if you get confused about an acronym. But generally speaking, SFSP, you're going to hear that a lot today because that's the subject of this training. There's also another summer meals program, which is the seamless summer option. However, that particular summer feeding program is only available to school systems in the state that participate in the National School Lunch and School Breakfast program during the academic school year. So we won't really touch on that for today's training, but just in case you do hear that acronym. SFA would be our school food authorities, those school systems that participate in National School Lunch and Breakfast. And those are the acronyms for those programs right below. And then when we use SA, we are referencing the state agency. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're specifically referring back to our agency, Department of Education, Division of Nutrition Support. Some other acronyms that you probably see used frequently throughout the presentation today is RO site, which refers to a restricted open summer site. Also a CE site, which is a closed enrolled summer site. I do have a definition of restricted open on this slide, but we actually will go into more depth on all the different site types later in the presentation. Of course, I've already defined LDOE and DNS, and you've heard from LDH, the Louisiana Department of Health, this morning. And then 2 other agencies that we work closely with are LDAF, Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, which is our commodities program in Louisiana. And then, of course, USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, is ultimately the federal program that we at the state report to for these child nutrition programs. Okay, lots of agenda items to cover today. We will touch on all of these various agenda items. Some we've touched on already. We may not necessarily go in this particular order, but we do plan to talk about all of these things over the course of the next 2 hours. And I just threw a slide in here that gives y'all some general information about our team. So in the upper left-hand corner, most of y'all are probably familiar with our general line, 225-342-9661. More than likely, if you call that number, you're going to get Miss Lily Franklin, our administrative program specialist. And it's through that number that you can ultimately be transferred to anyone listed on this slide. So Mr. John Dupree is our division director, and Dr. Judy Strassner is our section administrator or our direct supervisor. And then, as I've mentioned, I am the summer food service program coordinator. My contact information is kind of in the middle of the slide. And then all of the other individuals that we've listed to the right alphabetically are staff that also work with the summer food service program, as well as the National School Lunch, School Breakfast program, Fresh Fruit and Vegetable program, Seamless Summer option. And I also work with those programs. So we kind of all wear multiple hats, but some of y'all have probably heard already from some of these individuals listed, but just so you're familiar, we have Dana Dozat, Donald DeRuin, Wayne Dupree, Janet Dupree, Helen Folks, Babette Lanius, Stephanie Luke, who's already spoken today, Courtney Neubauer, Toya Porter, Trondra Scott, and Sarah Trahan. So you could be hearing from any of those individuals pertaining to summer 2022. Okay, so we can skip this slide since we went ahead and did LDH first. First thing we'll get into is that pre-application process, the SFSP Prospective New Applicant Checklist. Okay, this is a busy slide, but we had this slide in our presentations a few years back, and I decided to bring it back in here just to give you an overview of kind of what you can expect, I guess, timeline-wise on what the process is of coming on board. So we sometimes call it onboarding sponsors when we have a prospective new applicant that's trying to sponsor a program. I think everyone on the call at this point should be familiar with step one. Step one is that initial application that you'll need to gather and submit to us on or before April 15th. We call that sometimes the pre-application. And a lot of you have probably been in contact with Trondra Scott. She's been a huge help to me in making sure that prospective sponsors are getting their questions answered and also getting the information that they need to be able to apply for sponsorship. So the SFSP Prospective Sponsor Checklist is something that should have already been forwarded to you. And that's a 3-page document that has some bulleted items. And it basically just gives you a big overview of what we would expect at the agency to receive from a prospective applicant in terms of their initial application submission. So that is the piece that is due on or before April 15th. We're going to get into the other steps real quick, but it's on the next slide that we actually have a screenshot of what that SFSP Prospective Sponsor Checklist looks like. Okay, so after you have submitted your complete application and the state agency has reviewed it, if a determination is made that we do need to go forward with the sponsorship and we're ready to move forward, generally the next step is for us to issue you, it's just a 1-page document and it's called the CMP information sheet. And that's basically where we're just getting base information about your operations. So we need to know the official, legal name of the sponsoring organization and the address that's used for IRS purposes. And then you'll have to name 3 individuals on that form. You will have to identify who's going to be recognized as the head of the organization. For our school systems, we typically refer to that as the superintendent, but for our other summer sponsor types, that could be a variety of different individuals. And then you'll also name a board chairman as well as an authorized representative. So the authorized representative is generally going to be our primary point of contact for the sponsoring organization. So that's usually like the program coordinator or the person that's basically handling the day-to-day business at the administrative level. So that 1-pager gets completed and then sent back to us. And there's instructions on how you can submit it back on the actual form. Once we get a completed form back, we then take the information from that 1-pager and we populate it into a pretty lengthy document that is officially called the CMP Single Consolidated Permanent Agreement. So anybody that may have participated at the sponsor level in a child nutrition program in the past, you probably would remember this as the gold agreement. It was printed on gold colored paper, but we've changed that some years back. So now it's a white and blue document. And that's ultimately the agreement that the sponsoring organization would enter into with Louisiana Department of Education. That's where you're agreeing to follow all of the regulations, all the procedures, all the requirements of the program. And those individuals that you named on the CMP information sheet, they all have a signature place in that agreement. So once that gets mailed to you, pre-populated, and you've reviewed it in full, then you get the individuals named in it to sign off and date. And then obviously you want to make a copy of that for your records, but we need that original mailed back or hand delivered to us. From that point forward, we are then able to consider that your organization is provisionally approved. That does not mean that you're outright approved and you can begin operations. That really just means that we're going forward with creating user IDs and passwords for the individuals named on the agreement. So we're giving you online access to be able to pull up your official online SFSP application. And that is the one piece that does get completed annually. So our returning sponsors, they're not doing steps 1 through 3 from year to year. They are doing step 4 on an ongoing returning basis. It's also usually between steps 2 and 3 or steps 3 and 4 that someone from the state agency is going to contact your organization and set up some dates and times to come out and do pre-approval site visits. So that's something else that we have to do with the onboarding process. We have to physically report to the sites that you intend to serve meals at and do just a brief overview. And we have an instrument that we use to check various things. So the final part, of course, is that the access to the online application. And that is ultimately what has to be completed, submitted, reviewed by the state agency with a status change from submitted to approved before operations can begin for summer 2022. And this is a screenshot of basically most of page 1 of the SFSP Prospective New Sponsor checklist that Trondra has probably already provided to you, or I've provided to you directly. After this training is done, we are going to send this PowerPoint as well as the recording of this PowerPoint to Pennington to be posted on the Louisiana Fit Kids website. So usually they do that in a few days' time. It's typically posted within a week's time from the actual live training. So everyone that's participating today will be able to access this PowerPoint slide deck as well as the recording. And once you access the PowerPoint, you'll then be able to use all these internal links that we provided, which we provided a good number of them throughout the presentation. So again, this is just a screenshot of a snippet of a part of that checklist. Remember that it's 3 pages in length. And these are the items that would be considered a piece of the pre-application or your initial application due on or before April 15th. Okay, there are a lot of things that are bulleted on that 3-page document. So over the next few slides, we're going to kind of break that out a bit. And we're going to acknowledge that some of the things that are listed and bulleted in that checklist, they may not be applicable to every single sponsor type that applies to participate. So first up is the signed and completed summer 2022 training attestation form. Every prospective new sponsor must review that in full. Every training that is cited in that document must be reviewed in full, and a signature on that document is an indication that the sponsoring organization, someone on behalf of it, preferably administrative level, has reviewed those trainings and they understand the requirements of the program. So we must have a signed and dated version of that in your application packet. Secondly, if you are a private nonprofit group, we generally would expect to have a 501c3 tax exempt letter contained in the application packet as well. For our governmental and university agencies, typically this would not apply, but for our private nonprofit groups, our food banks, our religious-based organizations, this does tend to apply. There is one exception for that, and that deals with our religious group organizations. If a church group does not hold a 501c3, however, they do have a directory or some type of document that shows that they are part of a larger organization, they fall underneath the umbrella of a large organization as one of their facilities, we can take that in lieu of the 501c3. However, if you have a 501c3, certainly submit that. Then there's also, we need proof of completion with LaGov ERP. And that's basically, that's another state agency that you are registering with. And that's a requirement for anyone that's going to get state funds. So that's completed by another agency. But once you complete that process, our agency becomes aware of it. So those individuals in Louisiana Department of Education, appropriation control that actually process claims, they can see this information. They can see if you're registered. They can see what bank account it's tied to it. But we in Division of Nutrition Support we don't have access to that type of information. So we just need some type of document printed showing that you've started the process and that you're officially registered to receive state payments. The next thing is relatively new, the unique entity identification number. So in the past, our sponsoring organizations have always had to report their DUNS number, which is the Data Universal Numbering System. They've had to report their DUNS number to us. And then they've also had to show us proof that they are registered with SAM, the System for Award Management. Just this month, the DUNS has been replaced with what's called a unique entity identification number. So if you don't currently hold that, please be sure that you get in touch with the SAM system, and you can get in touch with them by accessing their website at www.sam.gov. Or on their website, they have some various toll-free numbers that you can call to get in touch with them by phone. But one thing that's really important that we always try to note is the SAM registration is a requirement of any organization that's receiving federal dollars, which you would be receiving if you come on board as a sponsor for summer food service program. The SAM must be renewed annually because each time that you register with SAM, you're going to be given an effective start and end date. And it's the sponsor's responsibility to make sure that they renew prior to the end date, prior to that registration lapsing. This is a free of charge service. So if you get on a website where they're asking you to put in credit card information, they're trying to charge you X number of dollars, you're probably at the wrong website because this is a federal requirement and it's also free to sponsors. So it is the SAM organization that will provide you with the UEI number, and it's the SAM organization that you will need to register with to get that current registration in that 1-year time frame, showing that you're current with SAM. Additionally, as Elena had mentioned, every site location that's cooking or satelliting to other sites, even satellite locations themselves, if you're serving meals from the site, you generally will have to have a permit to operate that accompanies that site. So if you have your permits to operate at the time that you're submitting your pre-application, please include a copy of those. If you're in the process of getting those, you've contacted your local office, you've submitted your plans, and they're just in the process of scheduling the dates to come out and conduct those, make a notation of that in your application packet. And then additionally, we do require a JOT form submission, which is just basically an electronic application for each of the sites that you anticipate operating from. So any site that you plan to be issuing food from to children, you will need a JOT form submission on behalf of each of those sites. There is a place in the JOT form, I think it's actually the very last page that you navigate to. It gives you the opportunity to upload your permit to operate if you have one at that time. However, if you don't, you can just notate that you're in the process of getting that, and you'll submit it as soon as it's received. Continue to the next. Other items that are typically required in a pre-application are bulleted on this slide as well. So an organizational chart for the organization that you're applying on behalf of. So we just want to see the flow of your staff who currently works with the program. And if you know at that time who also is going to be having a dual role where they're going to be working in summer food service program as well, you can indicate that. If you know who your site supervisors or managers are going to be for summer operations, please submit resumes for those individuals. Also, we ask that you provide us with a business operations list. So any type of business operations that your organization is currently involved in, has recently been affiliated with, or expects to be participating or operating with, provide some information on that, especially if it's food service related in any capacity. In the application packet, we generally do ask that you just kind of very briefly tell us how many sites you're planning to provide meals from. So we have the JOT form process that gives us a lot of detail on each site, but we also ask that in your application packet itself, you just list the site name plus its address. and just kind of bullet that so we can just look at that quickly in an overview type of way. If your organization has recently received an audit, please include a copy of that. If that is not applicable at this time, please also indicate that in your application packet. Year-end financial statement, as well as a most current bank statement for the bank account that you anticipate using for your summer food service program. And that will be the bank account that you provide information on to the LightGov system when you are signing up for state payments. So once you contact them, they're going to have some additional things that they need you to complete. Generally, there's an EFT form that both you and your bank institute will have portions to complete. And then generally you have to provide a canceled check for the account that you plan to use for SFSP. Okay, you can proceed to the next. So if the organization is granted permission to proceed to the next phases of the prospective new application process, you can expect for the following to occur. So we did kind of already talk about this previously. Once we get the application packet in, we review it, we determine that certain criteria are met, and we can proceed and go forward to the next step. That's when we'll issue you that one-page CMP information sheet. You'll complete it. You'll tell us who you want recognized as the head of the organization, board chairman, authorized rep. You'll send it back to us. And then we will populate a CMP, single consolidated permanent agreement, with all that information placed in it, pre-typed. And we will send that to you for review and signature. And then also, as mentioned, state agency staff around that time would be contacting more than likely the authorized rep that's recognized on that CMP information sheet to schedule some days or a day, depending on how many sites you plan to have, to come out and do those pre-approval visits. And the pre-approval form that's actually going to be used by state agency staff, we have the link to that on the slide as well. Please be reminded that as an SFSP sponsor, it is the responsibility of those individuals named as principals to the organization to oversee operation of all areas of the program and to oversee all financial and administrative portions of the program. So when you sign up on that CMP, single permanent consolidated agreement, it's those individuals who are agreeing to ensure that as the program operates, it's going to be a compliant program that's following all rules and regulations. So it's also around this time that we're scheduling these pre-approval visits and you're completing your CMP, single consolidated permanent agreement, that we're going to go ahead and generate a login ID and password for the individuals that are named on that permanent agreement. So that will get issued via email to the email addresses that you have indicated on your CMP information sheet. So make sure that those are business related email addresses that you are checking routinely, because primarily we do communicate via email initially, and then that email may require some follow-up calls, but email is typically the most common way that we're going to communicate to you. So once you get an email, the head of the organization and the authorized rep in particular, please be reminded that issuance of login credentials does not reflect that you're approved to participate. The sponsoring organization staff must still go into the CMP website and complete an SFSP online application for summer 2022 to actually receive approval via the Department of Education. And as I mentioned, there's another bullet. I've already said this though. Generally, we're issuing the login credentials, the login ID and password, only to the individuals named on that agreement. So typically, we're going to issue custom login credentials for the head of the organization and the authorized representative. If you find that you have other office staff that are going to have duties and roles pertaining to things that we collect on the CMP website, you can create those additional user accounts, and we can assist you with that. But the state agency does not create any additional accounts beyond those first two that we set up. You in turn can create additional ones and give as few or as many rights to those logins as you choose to. So once the prospective new sponsors CMP online 2022 SFSP application has actually changed status from submitted to approved. The sponsoring organization is now able to begin operations following the setup that was described in its online application, and that's relating to start date that you've captured, the meal type or types that you're going to be offering, the meal service times that you've documented. And we did want to mention too that it's also the sponsor's responsibility to communicate with us ASAP any changes that may occur to that plan program. So you may get your initial online application approved, and so you begin operations the following Monday, and then suddenly you realize that one of the sites is the times that you've designated for lunch is just really not working. The bulk of the kids are coming at a later time, so you'd like to bump everything back by an hour. That's certainly something that you can do, but that must be done via a revision/update to your online application. So changes in the program from what you originally proposed must be documented through the online system, and you must create a revision, submit that, and receive approval in order to actually have those changes go into effect. As I mentioned briefly earlier, there's just not enough time to really go into every last detail of the online application piece today, but we will be having a separate training on the CMP online application that's going to go over some different best practices and steps to communicate changes to us via revisions.
Okay, so I'm going to do the next couple of sections. So the first thing we're going to talk about is basic program requirements and requirements specific to this coming summer's operations. So we're going to let you know what we know as of right now. So the program purpose, the SFSP program was established to ensure that low-income children continue to receive nutritious meals when school is not in session. And through this program, free meals that meet the federal nutrition guidelines are provided to all children at approved SFSP sites in areas with significant concentrations of low-income children. There are some different sponsor types. We have public or private nonprofit schools, or SFAs. We kind of touched on this at the beginning of the training. These are schools that participate in the National School Breakfast or School Lunch program. We have public or private nonprofit residential camps. We have public or private nonprofit colleges or universities. We have local units of government. So local, county, municipal, state, or federal governments can participate as sponsors. And then we also have other types of private nonprofit organizations that participate. Some may be churches, some are just other organizations that do this type of feeding. So sponsors are responsible for ensuring that all sites under their jurisdiction or oversight are operating an approved SFSP in accordance with their most recently approved online application. So let's say we have a sponsor, we're going to call them ABC Food Bank. Well, that sponsor is operating 3 sites. They're operating Site A, Site B, and Site C. So for instance, in this scenario, sponsor ABC Food Bank has a central kitchen located at Site A that's also a feeding location. And then from that central kitchen, they're also sending food to Sites B and Site C. So sponsor ABC Food Bank is responsible for the operations at all 3 locations, but essentially the sponsor is the entity or the organization that provides that oversight over all operating SFSP sites. Whether they're affiliated to the sponsoring organization itself or whether they're just sponsoring the program for another group of people. So these are some things that sponsors should note. They must note the following. They need to demonstrate financial and administrative capability. Not everybody has the financial or administrative capability to be a summer sponsor. They may need someone else to sponsor the program that they want to operate. Sponsors must not be seriously deficient in any other child nutrition programs. If there is a notice of serious deficiency in another program, then this isn't really a, a good fit and sponsors won't be allowed to operate. They must serve low-income children. They must conduct a nonprofit food service. So per the administrative guide for the summer food service program, a sponsor is operating a nonprofit food service if the food service operations are principally for the benefit of participating children, and all the program reimbursement funds are used solely for the operation or improvement of such food service. So all program reimbursement funds are used solely for the operation or improvement of the food service. So this doesn't mean that the program has to break even or even operate at a loss, but it does mean that all income must be used for the sole purpose of operating a nonprofit food service. Sponsors must also provide year-round service, not necessarily food service, but some type of year-round service to the community. They must exercise managerial control over their sites. They must conduct pre-operational site visits. So we at the state agency may conduct a pre-operational visit, but then you will also be required to conduct pre-operational site visits at any sites that will be operating throughout the SFSP. And then sponsors are also required to sign written agreements with the state agency. Here's some of the responsibilities for sponsors. They must take part in the state agency's trainings like you're doing today. We also are going to cover some additional trainings that we're going to have since there's so much information to cover. Sponsors must locate and recruit eligible sites if administratively able. So some sponsors only operate one site. Some sponsors have multiple sites, but it is up to the sponsor to locate which sites they would like to operate. They will hire, train, and supervise all SFSP staff and volunteers. These USDA guidance manuals are really helpful. So the USDA SFSP Administrative Guidance for Sponsors book has more details on training requirements. And then also sponsors must competitively procure food to be prepared by the sponsor or vendor for the meals delivered to sites. So there's going to be 2 additional SFSP sponsor trainings in the month of April, specifically to cover procurement procedures or processes in the SFSP. Exact dates are going to be provided later in this presentation. But competitive procurement is required in this year's summer SFSP. Sponsors must also note the following responsibilities. They must monitor all sites each summer in accordance with USDA federal requirements. There are some exemptions that have applied in some years, depending on whether there's waivers available to the sponsor. Sponsors must prepare claims for reimbursement. That means verifying the accuracy of the supporting records. It is up to the sponsor to do that, to verify the accuracy of supporting records for any claims for reimbursement. Sponsors must ensure that all sites are sustainable. Is the site working? Shannon mentioned earlier that there may be a site where you have to move the meal time. Occasionally there's a site that's just not working. It's just not sustainable. Maybe not enough kids are coming, or there was an estimate of kids that were going to come and it's not happening. So that's something that needs to be done at the sponsor level to make sure administratively that it's working. And then sponsors must maintain all program documents for the required time frame of 3 years plus the current year. All of your program documents become federal documents. They become part of your program, and those all must be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. Don't throw them away, destroy them, anything like that. They are federal documents. Okay, next we're going to talk about some of the site types. So we've talked about sponsors and the sponsor types. Now we're going to talk about site types. So we have open sites. An open site serves meals to any child 18 years of age or younger. Children participating in the meal service are not required to be enrolled in a program. This basically is a site that's open to any children in the community. Next, we have a restricted open or RO site. The purpose of the restricted open site designation is to allow sponsors that want to operate an open site to restrict or limit site participation based on reasons of space, such as the amount of seating capacity that you have, or based on security, safety, or control, such as dealing with the number of adult staff that are available at the meal service, or like the adult to child ratio. Next, we have closed enrolled sites, or CE sites. A closed enrolled site offers meals to a specific group of low-income children. The children must be enrolled in the program in order to receive the meal. We occasionally see this at school food authorities who are operating summer school or something like that, a summer program where the kids participating in the program are enrolled at that school. Next, those are the most common: open sites, restricted open, and closed enrolled sites. But we will go ahead and touch on the other site types. But just remember that those first three are the ones that we see the most often. There can be residential or non-residential campsites. So kids may be staying overnight there. They may offer regularly scheduled food service as part of the organized program for those enrolled children. There's NYSP sites. This is a site or sites offered at a college or university that participates in the National Youth Sports Program. Then we have migrant sites. These primarily serve children of migrant workers. They're operated by those with appropriate certifications from a migrant organization. You could operate a homeless site. This is an institution that supports homeless children in some type of temporary residential setting. And then there's also the option for an Upward Bound site. So Upward Bound is a federally funded TRIO program established to help high school students overcome social, academic, and cultural barriers to higher education. So Upward Bound seeks to first help students achieve academic success in and to graduate from high school. And then they also encourage enrollment and persistence in post-secondary education. And just please note, and we're going to cover this a little bit more, but the free meal eligibility is established differently among sites. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, USDA's SFSP Administrative Guidance for Sponsors book has really great information on this. So USDA has several handbooks that are available. They're full of great information. There's the Administrative Guidance for Sponsors. There's the Monitor's Guide. There's a Nutrition Guidance for Sponsors. And then there's also a Site Supervisor's Guide. The most up-to-date versions of these SFSP guidance materials can be accessed at the link below. And like we said, this training is going to be posted on the Louisiana Fit Kids website, where you register for this training, and you'll be able to click the live links at that time. So we do have some a lot of federal regulations really that regulate this program. So I'm actually going to take a minute to show you where you can find these regulations on our website. So our website is cmp.doe.louisiana.gov. It will take you to this page here. From here, you can click on SFSP. And from there, you can actually click on regulatory guidance. And when you go here, these are live links that take you to federal regulations. These are federal regulations for the Summer Food Service Program found at 7 CFR 225. And that is going to provide you with the regulations pertinent to this program. Okay, there we go. So that is where you can find the regulations pertinent to this program. So the SFSP is administered through an agreement between the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, Food and Nutrition Services, and the Louisiana Department of Education, or the state agency. There is a cash per meal reimbursement provided to sponsoring organizations through the CNP's website's claims for reimbursement feature. So note here that you are reimbursed based on meals provided, eligible meals provided to eligible children, reimbursable meals to eligible children. With supporting documentation, those can be claimed for reimbursement on the CNP website's claim for reimbursements feature. There is also an option to get commodities or USDA donated foods are available for some SFSP sponsoring organizations. This is through the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry. There's a signed written agreement that's required annually. Mac Williams is the director of the Department of Agriculture. If you need access to this information, let us know and we can get you connected with that information. But that is Mac's number right there, 225-922-1319. Okay, per the SFSP regulations that we just discussed at 7 CFR or Code of Federal Regulations, Part 225.9b, sponsors eligible to receive commodities under the summer program include self-preparation sponsors. So you have to be a sponsor that's going to prepare your own food for the children. You can't have a vendor or a food service management company or anything. You have to be a self-preparation sponsor. Other sponsors eligible to receive commodities include sponsors that have entered into an agreement with a school or a local SFA for the preparation of its meals. So if you're working directly with a school or SFA, and then sponsors, which are SFAs that have competitively procured program meals from the same food service management company from which they competitively procured meals for the NSLP during the last period in which school was in session. So if there's an SFA that's using a food service management company during the school year, and they've competitively procured that, that company, then they are allowed to continue use of that company and get commodities throughout the summer food service program. Okay, so the assistance available to sponsors, the cash per meal reimbursement, which is received through submission and payment of SFSP claims for reimbursement, and any possible SFSP advance requests are available to assist sponsors with the cost of providing USDA approved meals and or snacks and allowable operating and administrative costs. So there is an option to request an advance for the summer. You can request a June advance or a July advance. And that's done in the online application if you're granted access to that. But that is an option where you can request an advance. There's a formula that helps figure out exactly how much is warranted to each organization requesting an advance. And then of course that all has to be paid back or deducted from the claim for reimbursement once that has been processed. We will discuss meal pattern requirements and the use of funds later in this presentation. Next, we're going to talk about the requirement to publicize the summer food service program and also to notify LDH of planned programming. There is a media release requirement. All SFSP and seamless summer option sponsors. So if you'll remember, the seamless summer option sponsors are those that participate in school breakfast and school lunch. But they all must promote their program to the local community if they're operating an open and or restricted open site. So examples of media that can be used include, but aren't limited to, of course, the use of a local newspaper, a radio advertisement, flyers, posters, signage, social media, robocalls, and more to get the word out. On the other hand, if you're operating a closed enrolled site or a campsite, and the campsites are less common, but they must promote their program to the anticipated participating families. So If you're a closed enrolled site, that means that you're only open to children that are enrolled in a specific program. And those children or families must have some type of media release or some type of communication to let them know about this program. Therefore, their outreach is much more narrow in scope. So you could send pamphlets home to particular households who would be targeted for program participation or for activities that are going to be offered at that site if you're operating a closed enrolled site. In addition to the requirement for school to promote the summer program, all other sponsoring organizations providing SFSP or SSO open and restricted open sites must promote their program to the local community using the newspaper, radio, flyers, posters, signage. The non-discrimination statement must be included on all communication with the public. You can visit the SFSP Outreach and Promotion webpage for template media releases, which we are actually going to show you in a couple of slides. You can also find templates of news releases in the administration guide. Okay, so a little bit more on outreach and promotion of sites. Like we just said, the non-discrimination statement must be included on all communication, and I'm going to show you where you can find the non-discrimination statement. But it must be included on everything related to SFSP or the seamless summer option. The full version is required on any document that relates to free and reduced student eligibility, or on any document that's greater than 1 page in length, with one exception. So a 1-page flyer that contains information on both the front and the back may use the short statement instead. Again, you can visit the SFSP Outreach and Promotion webpage for template media releases. And then you can refer to the homepage of the CNP website to see the full or current non-discrimination statement. And I'll show you right now where you can find that. So again, you're on cnp.doe.louisiana.gov. Here, if you click on civil rights, you will see the standard or the full civil rights statement. So all of this is part of the full non-discrimination statement. The condensed civil rights statement is this institution is an equal opportunity provider. So that is the short statement that can go on things that do not have to do with child eligibility or benefit issuance. But the full statement is needed on everything else. And that's here on our website. If you go to cnp.doe.louisiana.gov, then click on SFSP, then click on civil rights, you will find that right here. The other place that you can find this, if you come to our website, you can click on sign in, click on CNP web, and the non-discrimination statement is also here, and it's also available in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic. Those are the most common languages used in our state. This is also where you will log into the online application if you are granted, access to that. All right, return to our presentation. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is what I just showed you. This is when you click on the login button, it'll take you to this page. And on the left-hand side of that slide, you can see the screenshot of that non-discrimination statement. Now, if you are granted login access to the SFSP CNP website, you will be given access to the purple tab, which you will learn more about. And under that, there is an option called letters. And under letters, you can see there's a media release for enrolled sites and a media release for open sites. This is going to be pre-populated based on your sponsor and site level data provided in your current year online application. So you would have to fill out the application prior to having full access to this feature. but the form can either be downloaded and it can be downloaded and submitted to your local newspaper or other media outlets and given to families in the community that may want to know about your site. So again, to access that media release, you'll log into the CMP website. You'll click on the purple summer feeding tab. You'll click on applications and then letters, and then you'll select the appropriate or applicable media release. So if you're an open site, you'll click on open. If you're a closed enrolled site, you'll click on the enrolled, media release enrolled. Once accessed, the sponsor can copy and paste the information directly onto your own letterhead or other customized document that you want to put the information on. There's also a requirement to notify your local sanitarian's office. And this template is also found right there with the media releases for open and closed sites. You can click on health inspection. And again, this letter can be copied and pasted into Word or a similar document, and the formatting will remain in place. You're going to send this to your local sanitarian's office, and it can be used to not only notify LDH of your planned SFSP activities, but also you can request health inspection visits through that template. As a reminder, all SFSP sponsoring organizations must notify LDH of their intent to operate summer feeding programs annually with details on locations, the meal types, the times, regardless of the site type or location where meals are being offered. So this even includes those that are operating a national school lunch or school breakfast program. LDH always needs to be notified of summer feeding programs. Program outreach resources. The resource links provided on this slide, including posters, social media information, a prototype letter to parents, etc., is provided by an organization called No Kid Hungry. You'll be able to click on the No Kid Hungry picture on the slide to open up a link to their best practices and resources by other types of organizations, including faith-based outreach and grassroots outreach. So again, you can use robocalls, newsletters, websites, social media, morning and afternoon announcements at schools, flyers or posters, partnerships with the PTA. There's a bunch of different ways that you can reach out to families about your program. There's also optional signs by No Kid Hungry to promote program participation. There's a free summer meals yard sign that No Kid Hungry produces. We'll also note here, since you're a prospective new sponsor, you may not be available, but in years past, they've had a texting number 877-877, but that number has been discontinued. Now, families or caregivers, parents would text the word food or comida to 304-304, and it will connect them with meal sites that are located in their vicinity. And there's a lot of good information on nokidhungry.org. Sponsors not currently operating the SFSP and others who are interested may access the approved sites and current sponsors serving by parish. This is also something that can be found on the CMP website. You'll go to that orange page and go to helpful links grouped. There's an area located to the right of the login. There's an SFSP section, and there's actually an SFSP approved sites by parish link. And it will show it'll show currently who is providing meals in what parishes, how many sites there are. But please note that in the early part of the summer, it may look a little sparse. It gets updated as approved applications come in. So, and that takes a little bit of time for people to get everything entered and for the summer to really get going. So it may not be an indication of all the plans for participation, but it will show who is currently approved for participation. There is a requirement for hours of operation to be posted at open and restricted open sites. All open and restricted open sites must have an open site posting visible to the public that promotes the availability of meals. And so the operational information that needs to be included are the days of operation, the dates of operation, the meal service times, the start and the closing dates, and also contact information if parents or families have questions about participation at that open or restricted open site. So what must be posted on site at each SFSP facility? There needs to be an "and justice for all" poster that is pictured here. If you're approved for participation, we can get you posters for each of the sites that are going to be participating. We do have some of those. We've been told that they are going to be updating this poster and it will change, but as of right now, this is our current poster. So this does have to be publicly visible at every location that's serving the SFSP. Also posted must be the permit, the most current permit to operate. Not only does it need to be the most current, but it needs to be current. It needs to be, the dates need to be current. As well as a health inspection. The latest health inspection needs to be posted in a publicly visible location. Things that need to be kept accessible on site is the complaint procedure as well as the USDA non-discrimination complaint form. The complaint procedure is fairly new. It basically adheres to the civil rights requirements required by USDA, and it describes how your organization would tackle a discrimination complaint filed at your location. It provides step-by-step. It's a fill-in-the-blank form. It's something that we have posted on our website, and it's something that you would keep on hand to say, this is what we would do if we were ever given a discrimination complaint. And then you also need to have the USDA non-discrimination complaint forms on hand in case there is a complaint made. There's also a duty to notify LDH. So as we briefly mentioned earlier, all SFSP sponsoring organizations must notify their local sanitarian's office of any and all planned summer food service operations, including information on each location where meal issuance will take place. This is a requirement of all SFSP sponsors, regardless of the type of the sponsor type, as well as the site type. So whether or not you're a satellite operation or a full kitchen service, LDH does need to be notified. LDH will make that final determination on whether any additional inspection is warranted at site locations during the summer months. Sites must not begin operating until any or all LDH required documentation for permits and inspections for the summer months has been obtained. Alina mentioned in her presentation that they will not backdate a health inspection or a permit to operate. They will not backdate that. And you, according to federal regulations, you cannot be reimbursed for a meal if there is not a current permit to operate in place. So if you start serving before you get that permit to operate, you will not be reimbursed for any of those meals. For questions about permitting or inspections, you can contact your local sanitarian or the Louisiana Department of Health. For directory and contact information, as Alina had mentioned during her presentation, you can go to eatsafe.la.gov. Okay, we're going to cover just a few more important items related to the SFSP. The first one is who is eligible to participate in the program. So children ages 18 years and under, and or a person who is 19 years of age and over who meets both of the following criteria below. So a person can be ages 19 and older if they have both a mental or physical disability, which is determined by a state or local educational agency, and number two, participates during the school year in a public or private nonprofit school program. This is something established for the mentally or physically disabled. If you have any doubt about a person's participation or participant eligibility, make sure that you reach out to us at the state agency. There are some different meal types and timing requirements. There are several different, so at open, restricted open, and closed enrolled sites, sponsors may serve a maximum of 2 meal types per day, and you can utilize any meal combination displayed to the right of the slide, except for lunch and supper. Lunch and supper is the one meal combination that is not allowable in the SFSP. Meal selections can differ from one site to the next. So you could have a site that offers lunch and snack, such as lunch and an afternoon snack. And you could have another site that's offering breakfast and lunch. It doesn't have to be the same 2 meal types at each location. You could also have a site that offered breakfast only or supper only. So any of these are allowable meal combinations except for the lunch and supper combination. So for the timing of meals, in accordance with the SFSP federal regulations at 7 CFR Part 225, there are maximums in place for meal service length by meal type. So what that means is for breakfast, you can serve breakfast for 1 hour. For a snack or supplement, you can serve for 1 hour. And then you're given a little bit more time for a lunch or supper meal. You're given 2 hours for that. We are going to discuss a waiver option that's available in this area for summer 2022 a little bit later in the presentation, but we want to start with what the federal regulations state. Further meal timing service stipulations, they must ensure that a minimum of 3 hours elapse between the start of one meal service and the start of the next. So typically we do not see these meal services back to back. There needs to be a time gap in between them. And in the case of our more uncommon site types where both lunch and supper are allowed to be served with no snack in between, there must be a minimum of 4 hours elapsed between the start of each meal type. So camps, migrant, homeless, and up or down sites do qualify for a maximum of 3 meal types per day per site, which may include breakfast, lunch, and supper, but that is only available to the less used, the more uncommon site types like camps, migrant, homeless sites, and upward down sites. Okay, we're going to touch on the meal pattern requirements. We do touch on this in more depth in a later section, but please note the component requirements or the types of items that must be present for each meal by type. So for breakfast, there must be a bread or a grain, and then a fruit or a vegetable and a milk. So those are the 3 components that are required for breakfast. For lunch or supper, again, we've got the bread grain component, the fruit vegetable component. Within that fruit vegetable component, there must be 2 separate offerings under that component, totaling a minimum of 3/4 of a cup. So that might mean a 1/4 cup of fruit and 1/2 cup of vegetables. Sometimes we may even see 1/2 cup of fruit and 1/2 cup of vegetable, totaling 1 cup total. Also required under lunch or supper are a meat alternate component, as well as a milk component. And the milk is always offered in the form of liquid milk or fluid milk. For supplement or snack, 2 of the 4 component options must be offered together. So there must be a fluid milk, and or a bread grain, and or a fruit or vegetable, and or a meat or meat alternate. 2 of those 4 groups must be offered. Sponsors participating in the SFSP are responsible for ensuring that all sites in operation under their organization are meeting the meal pattern for the meal types in which it is offered. And failure to meet the meal pattern can result in disallowance of meals or the loss of funds when the state agency or contract agency reports to a site for a drop-in, which can be an unannounced visit and or for a review. Again, we'll reiterate that the meal selections utilized can differ from one site to the next. You may be offering breakfast and lunch at one site and snack only at another site, for instance. Okay, let's talk about what is offer versus serve. Offer versus serve allows sponsors to offer the full meal pattern to children for the meal types being offered. So as we saw in that last slide, the component requirements that are required. But the flexibility kicks in when children come through the line and may elect to decline up to one component or offering at breakfast and up to 2 items at lunch. But even with declining those items, the meals will still be designated as reimbursable. Some people really like to utilize this option because there's less food waste. Children have a little bit more control over what they select to eat and allows them to decline items that they don't want to take or don't enjoy eating. And so that can cause cost savings. It can result in cost savings to the program. In the past, this additional flexibility has been utilized. We're going to talk about this a little bit further. Again, there is another waiver option. According to regulations, this is only available to school food authorities, but there is a waiver option available for this upcoming summer program. Meals served must meet the USDA and state requirements. So reimbursable meals must meet SFSP meal pattern requirements, and this includes both the components and the minimum specified portion sizes. They must meet state and local health standards. They must be served to eligible children. You can't exceed more than 2% of total reimbursable first meals when you serve and claim second meals. So for any sponsor that's considering serving leftover meals in the form of second meals to children after the meal service times have ended or after meal services have ended, they should refer to the USDA Administrative Guidance for sponsors for a little bit more detail. That can be found on pages 60 as well as 66 and 67. Reimbursable meals must also be served according to federal and state regulations and requirements, and they also must be supported by accurate meal service records. Your records are very, very important. Like I said earlier, they must be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. There's 2 categories for SFSP costs. There's operating costs. Those are expenses directly related to providing the meal service. And there's also administrative costs. Those expenses directly related to administering or managing the program. Sponsors must familiarize themselves with allowable program costs. If someone's ever in doubt, please contact the state agency for assistance on that. We're going to talk a little bit about allowable operating costs. These are things like food costs, site labor costs, rent or utilities for kitchens or sites, non-food supplies such as styrofoam plates or napkins, equipment rental, pest control, telephone, waste disposal. These can all be approved costs, but please note that they must be approved in your current SFSP online application. There's a budget feature where you put in what your costs are going to look like, and you must have these things approved in your budget in order for them to be allowable operating costs. And additionally, without proper supporting documentation and approval for the use of various cost categories in the online application, they can become unallowable uses of funds. So it's really important that you're transparent in updating your budget with the operating costs that you anticipate or are seeing in your program. And then also note that shared costs such as utilities should be properly prorated in accordance with actual use in the SFSP. So if you're, for instance, using a facility that's used by the community, you're using it a few days a week and someone else is using it on weekends, that electricity should be prorated. You shouldn't be paying, for instance, the whole electric bill if there's other people utilizing that facility. Here's some allowable administrative costs. Administrative salaries based on the time that is worked, travel for approved SFSP purposes, telephone office supplies, administrative office utilities, administrative office rental, and audit costs are allowable administrative costs. Again, these need to be as approved in the current year SFSP online application. And again, without supporting documentation, those allowable costs can become unallowable uses of funds. Okay, so unallowable costs. This is very important. And you can refer to the USDA Administrative Guidance for sponsors for more details on unallowable costs of the program. In particular, you can see page number 132. But these are things that are not allowable uses of funds for the program. We kind of like to say that anything that's going to exceed the life of your program is not an allowable cost. So something like a truck, a box truck, large equipment, things like that, things that are going to exceed the life of your program cannot be purchased with program funds. But we have a whole page here with other unallowable costs. And if you are ever in doubt, please contact the state agency. We can discuss it with you. We can try to determine if that is an allowable or unallowable cost. And also, like I said, put everything into your budget. If you're approved to participate, when you go into that online application, put everything into your budget so you can have those costs approved by the state agency.
All right, so Shanna is back again, and we will be covering what's new in 2022 with the SFSP, and we'll be touching on those waiver options that Stephanie mentioned in a little bit more detail in this section. So for our returning sponsors, we generally set a time frame of when we're going to launch the website, the online application for the coming summer. For our returning sponsors, we have that currently set to happen mid to later part of this month. However, our prospective new applicants, it's not necessarily going to be that time frame when they get online access. We just have to work with each one one-on-one, and then when we get to that point in the process where we're ready to grant online access, then we'll be doing that individually for each prospective new, one at a time. Just a little bit background for this summer, USDA did offer 4 waiver options for summer food service program. We at the state agency applied for 3 of those 4. We applied on Friday, March the 18th, and we actually just received final notification on Sunday of this past weekend that USDA has approved all 3 of those waiver requests that we were wanting to utilize in summer 2022. So we likely don't have anyone on the call that's participated in summer 2019, but in case we do, this was basically something that began in the winter of 2018. There were some policy rescissions that happened for summer feeding. So in summer 2019, we were working with these same waiver options. And then came the pandemic in the spring of 2020, which kind of just put this on the back burner and opened up a whole slew of additional flexibilities. But we're going away from a lot of those flexibilities now as we're trying to return to more, closer to normal operations. So for this summer, for summer food service program, we will be able to offer the following 3 waiver types for our SFSP sponsoring organizations. So the first one is use of offer versus serve for our non-school food authority sponsors. The second one is meal service timing flexibility. The third one is program monitoring, waiving of first week visits. And like I said, this actually really first occurred in summer of 2019. So there is a memo on our website. We've provided the direct link at the bottom of the slide, and that's memo SFS 19-35. So that's a memo from a few years back that really touches on these waivers when they first were introduced. All of our SFSP sponsoring organizations that will be operational in summer 2022 are going to have to make a decision on whether they want to utilize or decline use of each of these waivers that are made available. So at this point, the state agency has been given the authority to offer these 3 waiver categories to our SFSP sponsoring organizations. We're working on building those into the online CMP application. So when sponsors get access to the online application, they'll also get access to a waivers link in the same area. And they'll just have to go to each of the various waivers that we're providing the option to opt into and make a decision as to whether or not they want to use the first waiver or decline use of it, opt into the second waiver or decline use of it, and they'll have to make a decision on the third as well. And then ultimately, it's going to be, now that the state agency has been given this authority, it will be us at the state agency that reviews and grants approval for waiver requests that are submitted by each of our sponsors as a part of their 2022 SFSP online application. So we are going to jump into those 3 waiver categories and go into a little bit more detail about what implementation of each of these really means. So Stephanie did touch on this a good bit, but just know that for any of our non-school food authority summer sponsors, so that's our private nonprofit, religious-based, Boys and Girls Club-based, food bank-based, for instance, those sponsors are university-based sponsors and our government-based sponsors. Without opting in and receiving approval for this OVS waiver, sponsors would be expected to offer and also have the children accept a complete meal. And by that, we mean all specified components and at least the minimum specified serving size to all children participating in the program. So you'd have to offer the complete meal that meets the meal pattern, and the children would have to take everything from the line. So what that translates to is for breakfast, you'd be offering, and the children would be accepting all 3 components, that being fruit, vegetable, bread, grain, and milk. And you would be offering, and the children would have to accept all 4 components, which is technically 5 offerings at lunch, which is the same meal pattern as supper. There's some exceptions to this rule that could exist. So if you happen to have a child that has a diet order on file from their medical doctor, that very clearly states that they have, for example, a milk allergy, and that document says, do not allow the child to have cow's milk, instead substitute with 100% fruit juice, for example. Well, that would be an exception to this rule. You'd be able to follow that diet order that's been issued by a medical doctor, offer the juice in place, have a child select everything else, and that would still be deemed a reimbursable meal. But for typical operations, normal operations, if you do not opt into this waiver, you have to offer it all and have children accept it all. So if a sponsor requests and receives approval for use of this particular OVS waiver in summer 2022, it can then apply the OVS option to one or all meal services that are being offered. And you can customize this. So when you actually get online access, you're going to have one sponsor level application in the CMP system. And that's everything documented that's going to happen at the administrative level. And then you're going to have a facility level application for each and every facility that you plan to serve meals at. And each one you can customize them. So it's actually going to be on page 3 of each of your site or facility level applications, where you're going to tell us yes or no if you intend to utilize offer versus serve. And then if you check that you are, you can then tell us which meal types you're going to apply it to. So some sponsors, they elect to just offer that flexibility at lunch. And they also offer breakfast at their sites, but we're going to get into why breakfast is a little bit tricky to do offer versus serve with. So some of them just elect to do it for lunch across the board, but not for breakfast. And that's fine. And that's your local level decision. But just know that if you elect to do it that way, you have to make sure that all of your staff know that that is the process that's being used. So offer versus serve is an option once you opt into and receive approval for that waiver for breakfast and or lunch and or supper. Offer versus serve has never been an option for the supplement meal type. USDA refers to snack as supplement in summer food service program. So for the snack, you always have to select 2 of 4 available components and the minimum serving sizes. You have to serve it and the children have to accept it. Never given an option to decline anything for a snack meal service. Okay, so if you choose to utilize the OVS waiver, which is optional, you don't have to, as a sponsoring organization's administrator and or coordinator, you are responsible for ensuring the following. For ensuring that the online SFSP application reflects exactly how and where offer versus serve is being utilized. So for instance, like I said earlier, which meal types are you allowing it to be used at and which sites? Most sponsors do it across the board and not at some sites, but not others, because that gets quite confusing. But technically you have the ability to customize it at some sites, but not all. You need to also ensure that site level staff are trained on the use of offer versus serve. So they need to be very clear on which meals they're going to be offering that option for. And then further, they absolutely need to know how to recognize a reimbursable meal when offer versus serve is in place. So for instance, for breakfast, kids could decline one of the offerings and take any three that they choose, and that would still be deemed a reimbursable meal. And then for lunch or supper, you would offer the 4 components, which are essentially 5 items. We'll get into that a little bit more. And kids could decline up to 2 of those 5 offerings, and that would still be a reimbursable meal. But staff need to know that, and they need to know what to do if kids don't have enough selections on their plate. That maybe turn them back to the line to get them to select another item to make a reimbursable meal, but you just have to be sure that your staff knows how to identify that. And then of course, the menu being offered to all eligible children still has to contain all of the required components and the minimum specified quantity. So by using offer versus serve, that doesn't free you up from having to meet the meal pattern in terms of having all components there in the minimum specified quantity. That's got to be available to every child that comes through the line, because even with offer versus serve being used, kids don't have to use it. They can still take a full meal if they choose to. And this is where we kind of mentioned how breakfast is a little bit different if you elect to do offer versus serve at breakfast. So breakfast is the one meal type where you have to deviate a little bit. Normally the meal pattern for breakfast, as Stephanie mentioned, is you have to offer at least 1 minimum serving of bread grain, 1 minimum serving of fruit vegetable, and at least 1 minimum serving of milk, which is an 8-ounce serving. And that's a reimbursable meal if kids take all of that. But if you're doing offer versus serve at breakfast, you're required to add a 4th item to your menu. And that can be another separate bread grain. That can be another separate fruit vegetable offering, something that's different than what you're already offering for fruit vegetable. Or it could be the introduction of a meat or meat alternate in the minimum portion size specified, which is 1 ounce of creditable meat. So you have to then offer 4, and kids have the option to decline 1 of them if you're doing offer versus serve at breakfast. The second waiver option is in terms of, it deals with the meal service timing flexibility. So if we're going strictly by what the federal regulations for summer feeding indicate, they say that breakfast as well as snack meal services, you cannot serve for greater than 1 hour at any given site on any given day. If we're going strictly by the federal regulations for summer feeding, they state that a lunch and or supper meal cannot be served for greater than 2 hours at length at any given site on any given day. However, a lot of sponsors acknowledge that maybe that's not enough time, and some of the locations where they're serving meals at. Sometimes some sponsors will have open sites and they're feeding kids from the community, but they also have kids that are coming there every day for some specified enrichment or educational purpose. So they may want to have shifts of different times that they're serving those different groups of kids. So they may need to exceed 2 hours at lunch, and that's fine if that sponsor elects use of this waiver and receives approval through their online application by the state agency. So we have a setup in the system to where if a sponsor elects use of this meal service timing flexibility, it's basically going to unlock these restrictions that we have in the application that are holding the sponsor users to 1 hour maximum breakfast and snack, 2 hours maximum lunch and supper. So once you elect use of this waiver, it'll free up those blocks, and you'll then be able to go into your facility level applications and set longer durations for service. So in this example for site A, they've decided that their breakfast meal service is going to be, the most popular time is going to be between 7:30 and 9 a.m. So they're exceeding that 1 hour max. And then for site B, they've decided that the most popular time for them to serve breakfast, where they're going to pull in the most kids, is from 8 to 10 a.m. So in this case, they could set those times because they've opted in to this meal service timing flexibility. So again, without that waiver, the website's got to know to block you or cap you at a 1 hour duration for breakfast or snack, and at a 2 hour duration for lunch or supper. Okay, the third waiver option really is kind of not applicable for this group of attendees, because in order to be eligible to use a first week monitoring waiver, the sites that you intend to use it at have to be returning sites and sites that are in good standing. So if you're a brand new sponsor, you did not operate last summer, you're not going to have that history for that site. So you really wouldn't even be able to opt into this waiver. But we do anticipate that there's going to be a lot of returning sponsors who do want to opt into this waiver, and that will allow them to be able to do one less program monitor visit. So just an FYI, every summer food service program sponsoring organization has to designate one of their administrative level staff to be their program monitor. And that person kind of serves as like the liaison between the sites and the coordinator, the director of the program. For SFSP, each year monitoring is required for every one of your summer sites that you have in operation. Which monitoring visits and how frequently they have to happen, it depends on some different factors. So you guys being Prospective new in your first year of operation, every one of your sites that you're going to provide meals at are going to require all of these bulleted monitoring visits. So each site would require a pre-op site visit, and that occurs prior to the kickoff of the program at each of the sites. Each site's going to require a first week visit, and that happens at every one of your sites in their first week of operation. That could be at different time frames. Some of your sites might kick off their program June 2nd. Some might be starting later, June 15th. So these could be happening at, at different time frames, but as long as they're occurring in the first week of each site's operation, you're compliant. And then every sponsor, whether they're new, returning in good standing, returning with only their usual sites, every sponsor every year has to conduct a first 4-week program monitor review of each of their sites. So that's the one that's a little bit lengthier to complete by the program monitor. That's the one that requires the program monitor to actually observe a meal service. And that's the form that's 3 or 4 pages in length, whereas those first 2 visits, pre-op and first week, they're just 1-page, quick little questionnaires that get completed when the monitor goes to the sites. Okay, you can flip to the next. So basically these monitoring visits / reviews, there's forms, prototype forms that we provide to sponsors for their program monitors to use. And there's various locations where you can access these. We have USDA Summer Food Service Program sponsor guidance books, which are essentially the SFSP Bibles. So this link here is going to bring you to a total of 5 guidance books on USDA's website. One is specifically earmarked for the state agency, so it's our administrative book. But there's 4 others that are specifically geared to the sponsors. All administrative level staff of sponsoring organizations need to be familiar with these books. So there's the administrative guidance for sponsors, there's the nutrition guidance for sponsors, there's a book on monitoring requirements for sponsors, and there is one on, did I not say site supervisors specifically for sponsors. These prototype forms can also be found in the forms booklet that we at the state agency have developed, and we posted it to our website as a memo. And that memo number is memo SFS 20-47, and we've titled it SFSP Forms Book. So again, when you get this actual slide deck, all of these links that are provided, all of these underlined items, you can click on them and actually go directly to the item that's being referenced. And then we do have those also broken out separately on the CMP website. So without login, you could go to our homepage, and when you navigate to the login area, without actually having a key and an ID and password, underneath the login box, you'll see memos, resources. You click on that, and then you click on Summer Food Service Program, and then you click on Forms. And that's where you'll see a section devoted to monitoring forms. So any of those three options will get you to these prototype instruments. All right. So some of you on the call may not even be familiar with these flexibilities that were provided by USDA the last 2 summers during the pandemic. Some of you may have heard about these and are not certain about whether or not they're going to be offered this summer. However, USDA has made it clear that they have not been given the congressional authority to renew any of these waivers listed on this slide. So essentially, in summer 2022, under the Summer Food Service Program, no sponsor will be able to do any of the following: provide non-congregate meal services, provide multi-day meal distribution, allow parents or guardians to pick up on behalf of children, provide home delivery of meals via set routes, or establish free closed enrolled site eligibility using school free and reduced area eligibility data. Go to the next slide. Okay, in terms of the non-congregate feeding waiver, the fact that it has expired, we want to be really clear on what that means. Basically, it means that things are going to return back to the way that summer feeding used to be prior to summer 2020. But specifically what that means is that any child participating in the program this summer will have to receive their meals one at a time during the specified timeframes approved on the corresponding online CMP application. They will also have to consume their meal in a supervised congregate setting, meaning that the kids are not going to be permitted to leave the site or any designated eating space, outside on the grounds of the site with their meal or with any portion of it. And they're also not going to be allowed to receive meals that are intended for later consumption. So when we had these flexibilities in place in summer 20 and summer 21, some of our sponsors were providing the kids that were on site with a hot meal for lunch. And then before they got dismissed for the day and sent home, they were given a shelf-stable breakfast to consume at home the following morning before they reported back to the program. Not allowed this summer. So there's no issuances that can be provided for later consumption. Meals have to be consumed on site in a supervised setting. Okay, the closed enrolled waiver option is one of the 4 that we did not apply for this summer at the state agency. And that's predominantly because we still have 2 other ways for sponsors to establish sites as closed enrolled sites and still have free eligibility, or the ability to give free meals and get reimbursed at the free rate, even without the state agency applying for that waiver. So there's 2 methods that this can be done. And this is going to be confusing because this was confusing for our returning sponsors. So I expect it'll be confusing for y'all too. So one option is, and again, remember, closed enrolled sites are those sites where you have kids who have enrolled to be there for some specific program that's being offered. You're not feeding community kids. You're not advertising the program to the community at large. You're not allowing walk-in kids to come get a meal. You're only feeding kids enrolled on a roster who've signed up to be there. So there are still 2 ways to designate those site types as free. One is to use sponsor-derived data. So that means you would have to collect free and reduced eligibility data for each of the children that's enrolled. And that could be tricky because typically that's collected through a free and reduced meal app. And I don't know if anybody on the call is prepared to start processing free and reduced meal applications. Another option is, thank you. Another option is by getting that data from the local school system where these kids are typically enrolled. And that might be tricky to do as well, because we have some pretty strict PII laws in the state of Louisiana that protects children's data. So anything that's, is it potentially identifiable information? Anything that could identify a child, their eligibility status, their first and last name, their date of birth, their home address. Basically, a school system is going to have to enter into a data sharing agreement to protect that data to ensure that it's being handled properly. And that's at the school system's discretion if they want to share that data with you. The other option, which is probably the more feasible option, is to use data that we, the state agency, are providing to you. So through the community eligibility provision, which is available to our school food authorities that offer national school lunch and school breakfast, and it's grown quite a bit and expanded over the past few years. We actually have the ability to give you in a drop down for each of your facility level applications that you've designated as closed enrolled. We can give you a list of school sites that are in that academic attendance zone that normally do community eligibility provision. And as long as you have a site or sites in that list, you can select any of them and establish your free closed enrolled site eligibility from the data that we give you. Long story short, in terms of closed enrolled sites, if you think that's something that you absolutely want to do, don't panic. I don't think we're going to have an issue even without the waiver for this area. Most parishes, I think probably 98% of our parishes have community eligibility provision sites present. So I think we will be able to establish free eligibility at closed enrolled sites that way. If you're really concerned about it, you can always contact me. Here's my contact information again, and we can talk through it some more. Okay, so we have about 30 minutes left and still quite a bit of slides to cover. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker through this section. This is just basically a Q&A section on some things that we wanted to just specifically point out. Stephanie's already touched on this. So the question on this slide is, what meal types may be served by a facility or site under summer food service program over the summer months? And we really already touched on that. So you're going to tell us in your online application for each of your facilities on page 2, you're going to tell us which meal combos or which meal type, if you're planning to do just one, you're going to be offering at that site. It can change from one site to the next. You can do breakfast and lunch at one, lunch only at the next. That's totally fine, but you're not allowed to do the coupling of lunch plus supper at any given site. That's an open, closed enrolled, or restricted open site. So if you're not a school food authority, which I don't think anyone on the call is, what meal pattern must you follow? So you must follow the summer food service program meal pattern. Our school systems have some flexibility in this area. They can elect to use the summer food service program meal pattern or the one that they're normally following in the academic school year for national school lunch and school breakfast, which is actually a harder meal pattern to be compliant for. There's more stipulations and maximums and such. But if you're not a school system and you are a summer food service program sponsor, it's the SFSP meal pattern that you must be compliant for. This is a screenshot that has a lot of clutter and it looks complicated, but it's really not. This is just basically a screenshot that we took from USDA's SFSP Nutrition Guidance book, page 16, I believe. Is that right?
11.
Page 11, sorry. So this just shows you at a glance. The first column is basically the different food components. And then the second column is breakfast, and it tells you how many of the components you need to select and what a full serving size would be for various foods that fall under each of those components. Lunch or supper, it tells you that you must select all 4 of the component groups. But if you jump down to the fruit and vegetable area, lunch and supper can be a little bit tricky in that regard. If you're doing a lunch or supper meal, you do have to offer all 4 components, that being milk, fruit, vegetable, meat alternate, and bread grain. But that's 4 components. You're required to offer 5 items. So they go a little bit more specific, USDA does with the meal pattern, and stating that the fruit vegetable component, you're required to offer a minimum of 3/4 of a cup. And you have to offer that by offering at least 2 different offerings. So you can do a fruit and a fruit. You can do a vegetable and a vegetable, or you could do a fruit and a vegetable, as long as when you sum up the serving sizes, you have at least 3/4 of a cup minimum. You cannot offer the same form of a fruit or vegetable. So apple juice plus an apple would not be allowed, but a 1/2 cup of apple juice plus a 1/4 cup of sliced grapes would be, because that's 2 different fruits. So just be aware of that. Again, like I said, please familiarize yourself with these USDA guidance books. They're really, really good. They have some really good references. They have Q&As in them. This is pretty much where I go first up when I need to look up something or research something. Okay, in terms of when you're using offer to serve with the summer food service program meal pattern, and remember, you'd only be able to do that by electing that waiver and getting approval to use it. What you offer is going to be exactly the same with the exception of breakfast. Remember, with breakfast, if you're not using offer versus serve, you have to have the minimum portion or minimum serving size for bread, grain, fruit, vegetable, and milk. If you are doing offer versus serve with breakfast, you still have to meet that requirement, plus offer a 4th offering and at least a minimum, that minimum specified portion size. And that can be another different fruit vegetable. That could be another different bread grain, or that could be by introducing at least a 1 ounce portion creditable of meat alternate. Lunch and supper is still the same offering. Nothing has to be added. Kids can decline up to 2 things that are offered there. Breakfast, you have to add that 4th thing to the menu and give kids the option to decline up to 1 if you're doing offer versus serve. Snack has no option for offer versus serve. Gotta offer 2 of the 4 components. Kids have to take 2 of the 4 components. So we had put this slide in here originally before we got the approval for these waivers. So the question was, how will sponsoring organizations receive notification and updates regarding 2022 SFSP waivers? You're being notified of that today, that we just received final notice on Sunday of this past weekend that we've been approved for the 3 that we've applied for. Our IT staff is actually working now to get these built into the CMP website so that when we launch the application for our returning sponsors, they'll also have access to a waivers link or tab within the website that lets them opt in or opt out of the waivers. And the same type of thing would be offered to you guys if and when we get to the point of granting you online access. If for any reason you submit your waivers with the elections that you think you want to have, and then you realize, whoops, I really wanted to opt into this particular waiver, you can always email our child nutrition programs at la.gov email address and request for whichever specific waiver it is that you need to get released back for correction. We'll release it back to you. You can change your election and then you can resubmit it. Okay. There's often a lot of questions about reimbursement and how that works with summer food service program, especially with our new sponsors. So first up, what are the rates of reimbursement for summer 2022 and where can we find them? So every year we post a memo on what the new rates are. USDA releases these annually, and summer food service program rates of reimbursement are effective from January 1 through December 31, even though typically the summer food service program is only operational when school is not in session between May and August. So memo 22-67 is where we've published the summer 2022 rates. And then also for anyone that currently has online access, or when you do get online access, you can also view them by logging in on CMP, going under the purple summer feeding tab. And then on the left-hand side, there's a link for program administration. Once you click on that, you see a sub-tab that is labeled reimbursement rates. And then you can select program year 2022 to display the reimbursement rates. On the previous slide, we showed you how the rates are technically divided and broken out. For being super technical, USDA separates summer food service program rates between operating and administrative set rates of reimbursement. And that is true. that is how they are published, but in terms of how we reimburse through our claim system, we use the combined rates. So when you combine the operating plus the administrative level reimbursements, you get two different totals for each meal type. Which value you're going to receive is dependent on the meal prep that you're using for your program. And you're going to identify that to us. You're going to notate that to us in your online application, page 1 of each facility app. So you're going to tell us if you are cooking meals at that site for service at that site. You're going to tell us if maybe you have a central kitchen, but it's your staff that's producing the meals and satelliting them out to various locations. You're going to tell us if you're using a vendor to provide you with already prepared meals that your staff issues. You're going to tell us if you're using a food service management company that's really handling all aspects, production and issuance of meals. And depending on how you report that, on what type of setup you have, that determines if you get the higher or the lower rates. So if you look at the table on the right-hand side, our rural or small prep sites, they get slightly higher reimbursements for breakfast, lunch, supper, snack. And then sponsors that, for example, would use like a food service management company, they get slightly less for their reimbursement rates, but you'll notice it's only like 5 cents less for breakfast and 8 cents-ish less for lunch. It's not super significant, but just know that there are two different sets of combined rates, high versus low. Which ones you're going to get depends on what your mode of food service is. And this is a screenshot of what that section looks like on page 1 of each of your online facility level applications. There's a drop down and you tell us this site that I'm currently completing an application for is getting its meals in the following manner. You select the drop down, and anytime that the meals are actually coming from elsewhere, from an alternate kitchen location, the system is going to recognize that, and it's going to make you put in the facility name and address in which those meals are actually being prepared at. Okay, advances. Advances is usually a hot topic as well. So some sponsors, they do need some assistance with getting the program going, because remember, this is a reimbursement after the fact program. You submit your online application, you receive approval to begin operations, you have your LDH permits and inspections in place, you start operating. You don't actually file your first claim for reimbursement to request money from the Department of Education until your first month of service has ended. So you may start off your program June 1st, and in that case, you would not file your first claim for reimbursement until after your last operating day in June has elapsed. So you may have operated, for example, 6 weeks by the time that you get your first reimbursement paid. If you do wish to get an advance issued earlier to help you with, initiating the program, that can be requested, and that's built into the online application, specifically your sponsor level application. It's on page 5. And if you do want to be considered for an advance, you would place a check mark in that area. And then you would tell us which month or months you would like consideration for. One thing that we do want to mention, because some years ago, there was some false information going out there about advances. Advances are not money that's issued to the sponsor that the sponsor then uses for the program and has no obligation to repay. Advances must be repaid back by the sponsor to the state agency. And the state agency is going to make sure that they recoup that money back. So if you start operating in June, you've completed your application in May, you've requested a June advance. Once that application gets approved, we're going to start calculating it and working on it. And then you'll get an electronic funds transfer in the amount of the advance. And that'll help you with some of the setup for your program. And then say you get that advance the first week of June. Then you're filing your claim, your first claim for June in late June or early July. Once you submit that and it begins to get processed, appropriation control staff here at the department, they're going to check to see if an advance was issued by their agency or by their section. And if it was, that will be taken off the top of the money that's going to be reimbursed to you from your claim. So that money will be recouped and it will be deducted from that first claim for reimbursement. So just please remember that. In terms of claims for reimbursement, in the past, we did sometimes lump claim periods together if you had like a small month of operation. So if your program kicked off on May 25th, right after school let out, and you only had 4 operating days in May, but you had 22 operating days in June, we used to couple those claim periods. We're not doing that any longer. So each month is going to be a standalone claim period. And all of our non-school system sponsors are going to have to be prepared to report how many reimbursable first meals that they have provided at each site for each meal service type by day. You will have to capture daily information in that claim for all operations for the month of June to be able to submit that first claim for reimbursement. If for some reason you complete a claim through the online system, this is all happening after you've been approved to operate the program, after you've completed your first month of operation. If you complete your claim, submit it, and then all of a sudden you realize that maybe you accidentally reversed the number and you see that it's an error and you need it corrected. If you've just recently submitted that claim, same day or within the last couple of days, you can email LDOE Appropriation Control staff, Ms. Tamika Jean-Pierre, and ask for her to release that claim back to you to make some quick adjustments. So in that email, please be sure to indicate the name of your sponsoring organization as it's listed in our website, the claim period that needs to be released, as well as the associated program. So you would need to say, for instance, ABC Parish School Board, we made an error in our June 22 summer food service program claim. Can you please release it back to us so we can adjust it, recheck it, and then resubmit it? And, Appropriation Control needs that in writing for their records. Once they get that request and they've released that claim back to you, they will notify you back in writing that it's open and you may edit it, and then resubmit. The claim deadlines that are stipulated federally, they do still apply though. So ideally, if we can get claims in by the 10th of the following month, so if you could plan to submit your June claim no later than July 10th, that's ideal. Appropriation Control is happy, they're getting things in timely. But if we're being technical, the regulations say that you have 60 calendar days starting with the last day of your claim period to actually file that claim. So that means like a June claim, technically you don't lose that submit access until sometime in August, but we never, ever recommend you delaying submission of a claim. So just remember, if you ever have to get a claim released and you're approaching that deadline, that 60 calendar day deadline, you need to make sure you get that resubmitted ASAP, because if you pass that deadline, you may not have the opportunity you're not going to have the opportunity at that point to submit the claim, and you may have not even gotten any payment on that claim period. So just please be aware of those deadlines. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because this one was about school food authorities, but everybody on this call is potentially going to be submitting a prospective new sponsor application. So you're familiar with the JOT form. If you get approval to come on board, we give you online access. You submit your application, you get approval. Then you get contacted by an additional site that maybe wants to do a short-lived program for 2 weeks in July. You could still request to have an additional site added into your application. And that is, again, through the JOT form process. You would just access that link, give us the information on it. If you have the permit at that time, attach it and submit it. If you don't have the permit yet, provide a note saying that it'll be forthcoming. And then once we get it, we should be able to add it to your application. Okay, how much time do we have?
10 to 15 minutes.
All right, we don't have much time to cover the next 2 sections, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. Like I said, these slides will be made available to you on the LA Fit Kids website, as well as the recording of this training. But in terms of summer 22 SFSP reviews, the federal regulations generally state that any new private nonprofit organization must be reviewed in its first year of operation. You compound that with the fact that we operate on a 3-year summer food service program review cycle. And it just so happens that summer 2022 is year 3. So really anyone on this call today that winds up coming on board as a sponsor in summer 2022 can expect to receive a review this summer. And we currently have the contract company C and Resource who's conducting our summer food service program administrative reviews. in conjunction with us, because we still have a very big role in proofing those and in giving feedback and commenting on how we want to approach corrective action. But just be aware, if you are new in summer 2022, there's a very good chance that you're going to get a review, but you will be contacted about this. Okay, in terms of the review process, our review schedule is still in the works, even for our returning sponsors. I'm still wrapping that up. Like I said, if you're new in 2022, you can already expect that you're going to get scheduled for a review. Once we have our lineup of sponsors that we expect to get a review set up, we're going to post that on the website and send out a memo. And then just as a standard rule of thumb for summer food service program, the state agency is expected to review, to do site observation at no less than 10% of the total approved sites. So if you're a sponsor that is operating 15 sites, 10% of that is 1.5, we round up to 2. 2 sites would be selected for site observations to observe a meal service during your administrative review. This year, we're doing something new. Now that we're slowly starting to return to normal under the pandemic, we're going to do what's we're referring to as a hybrid review for summer food service program. The site level component, where reviewers actually select sites and then observe one meal service, that's going to be done in person, and that will be scheduled in advance, but you can expect that that's going to occur either in June or July. And then the actual administrative level, the financials, the oversight of the program, the training documentation, all those things that get looked at, that's going to happen in a desk audit or off-site capacity, and that'll happen after the site level reviews have been completed. We don't really hide anything from sponsors. We give you the test up front. So this slide actually has links to our sponsor level review instrument and our site level review instrument. So even though CN Resource is going to be conducting these administrative reviews for us, they still complete our state agency prototype review forms, and those can be viewed in advance to help you further prepare for an upcoming review. The review instruments did undergo some changes during the pandemic with all the flexibilities that were granted, but we're really not changing anything this summer, aside from just adding an extra section into the sponsor review instrument that lets reviewers, state agency or CNR staff, add comments to clarify things. Okay, technical assistance should be your friend. So any sponsoring organization that feels overwhelmed, as you may, because we're covering a lot of information here, you can certainly request to have one-on-one training by the state agency. So we call that technical assistance. To request technical assistance, we do ask that you send that to our general email address, childnutritionprograms@la.gov. And the more potential dates that you can give us in that email that you'd be free for that TA, the better, because our staff, their schedules do fill up really, rather quickly. And then just know that prospective new sponsors, we're always going to plan to do TA with you. You're new, we want you to be successful. We've got to have a review. So we may wind up contacting you to talk about possible dates for a TA before you ever request it in writing. And also, if you get to the point where you have your online access, your login and password, and you're just really overwhelmed by the completion of the online application, you can also request TA for assistance, having state staff come out to you to help you with completing that application properly. Okay, we definitely don't have enough time to go into a lot of depth in this program documentation section. Luckily, we will have a training that is specific to record keeping requirements in SFSP next month. So I encourage you all to sign up for that and participate. But we just wanted to make y'all aware of the various types of documentation that are expected to be maintained by sponsors. So production records, they're not technically required in summer food service programs. Some sponsors want to do them regardless, and we'll show you an example on the next slide. But daily meal count records or the equivalent are required. So you always have to have some backup that supports the count or the number of meals that you said you served at each site to eligible children for each meal type. And we'll show you examples of those prototype forms as well. Satellite account forms may not be applicable to you if you have 2 sites that you're operating and each site produces their own meals and there's no shipping of meals from point A to point B, then satellite account forms are not applicable. But if you are transporting food, you should know that you're going to have to complete satellite account forms. This is an example of the SFSP prototype production record form. It is optional. This is an example of the daily meal count prototype form. This is technically USDA's prototype form. The first page of it goes up to 150 meals that could be documented at a given site for a given meal service. There is also a continuation page, is it on the next slide, of the USDA prototype daily meal count form. Their form goes up to 250 first meals that can be documented. With the pandemic and all the flexibilities that have been granted in the last 2 years, we've found a need to go beyond 250 meals at given sites. So we, the state agency, have also developed a state agency daily meal count form prototype. And it sounds kind of random, but it goes up to 620 total meals. So if you access that memo 20-47 that we talked about previously, you will find USDA's daily meal count form prototype, and you will find the state agency's daily meal count form prototype. You can elect to use either of them or both of them, depending on if you have some sites with larger numbers. But these are the forms that we really highly recommend that you use to document meals served. Here's an example of a satellite account form. Like I said, it would be required if you are shipping meals from point A to point B. And this is just an example of what a complete one would look like. We do check these for completeness and accuracy. So we do always expect that the person delivering the meals is going to sign off and provide the time. And the person receiving the meals at the site, they too are going to sign off and document the time. This is a very busy slide. But this just talks about some of the documents that we would expect to see on review, or if we drop in to come do TA with you and your program has begun. Some of these things may not be applicable to you, and that's okay if they're not. But just make sure that if you are planning on paying certain expense categories like mileage reimbursement, for example, that you absolutely build that into your budget, which is a piece of your own loan application. So if it's not budgeted for, if you're not saying I plan to spend summer money towards this category, then it's not considered allowable. On review or on drop-ins, we're going to be looking for records that support food costs, such as any inventories that you're maintaining, delivery receipts for vended meals, payroll and time and attendance records for your site personnel, as well as purchase invoices for the program. Any money that's going into the summer food service program account, we have the right to research that and to look further into that. As a state agency, USDA also has the ability to do so. So any cash that you've collected, any cash donations that you may receive from individuals in the community, and then any funds that you're receiving from the Department of Education, whether that's advances or claim reimbursement payments, we should be able to see the flow of that money and that it's going back into summer food service program into that account. These are some other records that may be subject to be reviewed on an administrative review. Again, not all of this is going to be applicable to you. For example, the first bullet, agreement with schools to furnish meals. You may be planning to hire your own staff and produce your own meals. So you're not going to have an agreement with the local school system. So that would be NA. That second bullet would be NA if you're planning to produce your own meals. But if these categories, any of these categories do apply, then we expect that you're going to have documentation to back it. And then this type of information, generally that gets documented on your daily meal count forms and or your satellite account forms. So that's where we'd be looking for this type of information. As I mentioned already, basically every prototype summer food service program form under the sun that you could think of should be already listed in that forms booklet, which is memo SFS 20-47. And then there's some other forms that we also have broken out that are really important that we've posted separately. They're in that memo, but we've also posted them separately on our CMP website. And this is going to give you the path of how you would access those. Yeah, we're not going to go over the common SFSP review findings. I'll get y'all to read those on your own time. And please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have. We want to jump ahead to make sure that we have time to make mention of this. So there's going to be a repeat of today's training on Thursday of this week, starting at 1 p.m. And then beyond that, we're going to have 6 additional breakout trainings on key topics that we think we really need to reiterate. And these are open to prospective new sponsors as well as to our returning sponsors. So we have 2 more trainings in April. Both of those are geared towards just general procurement processes for summer feeding. And then the second one is on how to properly and fully complete a procurement plan, which is a required piece. That'll probably get touched on as well in the record keeping training. In May, we have 4 separate trainings. One will give you more information on the waiver process. At that time, we should have it built into the online system. I can talk in more detail about it. On the 10th of May, we're going to have a record keeping requirements training, where we're going to expand upon these things that we just very briefly touched on. On the 17th, we're going to talk about the online application in more depth and the process of revising it to update operations. And then on the 19th of May, we're going to talk specifically on summer food service program meal pattern, and also how to project quantities that would be needed to produce X number of meals by using USDA's food buying guide. If you go to the Louisiana Fit Kids website, www.louisianafitkids.com or .org, and you go to training and you go to meeting registration, these April trainings should already be posted. And if the May ones are not yet posted, they will be very soon. So please make note of these in your calendars and begin to register for them as they are available.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time. We have another training scheduled for this afternoon with school food authorities. So if you have any questions, please reach out. You can contact us at childnutritionprograms@la.gov. You can contact Shanna directly, or you can call our general line at 225-342-9661. We know that you really may have a lot of questions, and we're happy to answer them. It's just unfortunately we ran out of time today. So thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to getting to know you better over the next few weeks. Just one more reminder that initial application is due on April 15th. So that's coming up. So we will look forward to speaking with you soon.